Thank you, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the Alumni Speaker Series. The topic today is supply chains at times of crisis, the COVID-19 vaccine journey. To start, we're going to invite Dean Mary Wells to make some opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Samir, and welcome, everybody. As you've heard, my name is Mary Wells, and I'm so proud and privileged to be the Dean of Engineering. So I just want to say a good afternoon to all our alumni, our students, our staff, our faculty, our friends, and our community members. Welcome to the first Alumni Speaker Series session of 2021. I think it's going to be a really great topic. Today, our panel of experts from academia and industry are looking at the timely issue of supply chain logistics in vaccine delivery. I think this is a topic that we're all very, very interested in. This, as we have seen over the last month, is an enormous challenge on par with the development of these vaccines. As Canadians, we are all anxiously awaiting for our vaccines. And as we wait for them, we attempt to answer the big question. How do we get millions of doses from factories overseas or from America safely into the arms of the millions of Canadians as fast and as safely as possible? And what we are doing right and what obstacles need to be overcome. Today's session will be moderated by Samir Elhedhli, a professor in the Department of Management Sciences. He does research related to large-scale optimization, logistics and supply chain design, healthcare operations, airline scheduling, and data analytics. As always, we welcome your questions and will answer as many as we can in this session. I know I am so excited to learn more about the supply chain logics and what is going to be going on related to this important issue facing the world today. Samir, I'll pass it over to you now.
Thank you, Dean Mary Wells. Again, welcome to this session. I'm Samir Elhedhli, professor at the Department of Management Sciences here at the University of Waterloo. I'm going to be moderating this edition of the Alumni Speaker Series. The topic today is supply chains at times of crisis, the COVID-19 vaccine journey. What a timely topic. Before introducing the panelists, please note that today's session is being recorded and will be available on YouTube. Also, the audience can ask questions in the Q&A section to be answered later on during the Q&A session. For this discussion, I'm pleased to be joined by an expert panel composed of 2 alumni and 1 faculty member, all from the Faculty of Engineering at the University of Waterloo. I start by introducing our panelists in alphabetical order. The first is Hossein Abouee Mehrizi. Hossein is an associate professor and a Canada Research Chair in Healthcare Analytics at the Department of Management Sciences. He has expertise in data-driven modeling of complex systems. He collaborated with a number of organizations to help leverage their operational and strategic data for improved performance. This includes Ontario Health and Hamilton Health Sciences. His research has been recognized with prestigious awards such as the Canada Research Chair Award, Ontario Early Researcher Award, and the University of Waterloo Outstanding Performance Award. Hossein, welcome.
Thank you, Samir.
The second is Jim Estill. Jim is a Canadian technology entrepreneur, executive, and philanthropist. He started his first computer distribution business from the trunk of his car while in university, $2 billion in sales. Wow. He's currently CEO of both Danby Appliances and Shipperbee. Jim has invested in, mentored, and advised many technology companies, including BlackBerry. He joined their board before they went public and served for 13 years. Jim is an alumnus of Systems Design Engineering. He earned his BSc in 1980. Jim is also EY Entrepreneur of the Year 2019 Ontario winner. Jim, welcome.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. And you did introduce me as CEO of Shipperbee, but just for your information, we sold that to Torstar on Monday. So that was right when you had the information, but 2 days ago it was sold.
Oh, our information is not that up to date. Well, congratulations, that's the least I could say. Last but not least, Anne Robinson, a proven leader in analytics and digital transformation with expertise in operations, supply chain, and strategy. Anne has extensive experience in managing supply chains for complex global organizations. She's currently Chief Strategy Officer at Kinaxis and former Executive Director, Global Supply Chain Strategy, Analytics and Systems at Verizon. Before Verizon, Anne spent several years at Cisco, responsible for managing advanced analytics, business intelligence, and performance management teams. Anne is also past president of Informs. Anne has a BSc from Acadia University, a MSc in Management Sciences from the University of Waterloo in 1998, and MSc and PhD in Industrial Engineering from Stanford University. Anne, welcome.
Thank you.
As we face unprecedented challenges with COVID-19, we are aware of the role of supply chains more than ever before. The most recent is vaccine distribution. In the last couple of months, we became familiar with terms such as cold chains, ramping up manufacturing capacity, and timely deployment. Supply chains involve all operations from the inception of a product till its end of use. It includes sourcing, manufacturing, distribution, storage, recycling, and so on. Over time, supply chains evolved from cost-efficient to responsive to green to sustainable to humanitarian. The pandemic has revealed the need for supply chains where resources from different sectors and expertise from various domains are pulled together and repurposed to achieve a common goal. I refer to this as supply chain for good. Today's discussion topic couldn't have occurred at a better time. The newest chapter in the fight against COVID-19 is vaccine distribution. Behind this, a complex supply chain is being carefully planned and optimized. On the manufacturing side, pharmaceutical companies such as Pfizer are facing capacity problems to honor their commitments. On the deployment side, vaccine rollout is continuously changing given the uncertainty in supply. Many questions arise on whether it was possible to handle the crisis differently, at least from a logistics and supply chain perspective. What could we have done better? And what are the lessons learned? To shed light on these and related topics, we're pleased to have such an expert panel with us today. To kick it off, I start with the following question addressed to Anne. Anne, we heard claims that distributing the COVID-19 vaccine is one of the greatest logistics challenges ever. Do you agree with this claim? What are the specifics of vaccine supply chains and what new supply chain strategies are emerging as a result? Anne?
Thanks, Samir, and thank you for having me and my co-panelists today. It's a very timely and relevant conversation. Absolutely, this is one of the most challenging supply chain problems that we're going to be faced with as practitioners. And you asked about what are the particularities. I really think of it in three buckets. So the first piece really is on the front end. You talk about planning, you talk about the manufacturing process. We're in a situation where we know from day one that the demand is going to greatly exceed the supply. So what types of manufacturing facilities are going to be required? What types of decisions around the planning for that particular supply chain for that demand? And then how is that going to be allocated? So you talk about fair share allocation as one of the hot topics when it comes to talking about supply chain planning. Who is going to get how much of that planned availability? The second piece is really around the supply chain network and all of the peripherals. When we talk, we think so much about the actual vaccine itself. But the reality is you need syringes, you need vials, you need all the PPE. You don't want these healthcare professionals out there administering without the right amount of PPE covering themselves and their patients. We're learning that a vaccine like Pfizer requires saline before it's administered. So you have to think about that. And then something as a simple product that we might have played with as children as dry ice, for a good Halloween display, that has become one of the most critical elements when we think about supply chain. So not only do we have the availability of the peripherals, but where are we placing those peripherals so that we can ensure that once the vaccine's available, all of the peripherals are available to support. Then the third is the actual distribution itself. I don't think we've ever experienced the cold chain requirements on such a pervasive perspective until now. So we're talking about how do you ensure that as that vaccine is put into the belly of an airplane, that it's then transported across an ocean, and then it's arrived, and then it's put into a truck, that it maintains the temperature and all of the particularities around guarding that particular vaccine so that the quality and the efficacy remain intact. And so as you consider all those different dimensions, and I'm sure I can go into a lot more detail on all of them, those are really where I'd say where we need to get started. And maybe I'll let some of my fellow panelists add to it before answering some of the other questions.
Sounds good, Anne. I know Jim or Hossein, do you want to comment? Okay.
Well, I think there's never been a more challenging logistics issue, partly also because of the speed and the fact that you're not going into the normal distribution. Like Amazon's already set up to do their type of distribution, and all the other couriers and everything, they're all set up to do it in that way, but this is not normal product. Plus the value, I'm not going to say it's priceless, but it's so valuable because it's in such short supply, as vaccines particularly. If you waste them, which is what happens if they aren't stored at the right temperature, that means people will die, is the gist of it.
Thanks, Jim. Now, a related question, this is addressed to Hossein. Hossein, there is emphasis on vaccine availability as if it is the only obstacle. From a supply chain perspective, and once the vaccine is available, what rollout strategy should be adopted to combat the pandemic?
Thank you, Samir. Thank you for having me. Yeah, as Anne mentioned, we are really dealing with a very complex supply chain problem. And the only way that we can tackle it to make sure that we have a good rollout plan is to make sure that we have a good plan and strategy for every single stage of this supply chain. We want to keep in mind that the goal is to get the vaccine from the manufacturer somewhere in Europe, the States, and then eventually to get it to the arms of people. And this is not just one stage or two stages problem. We are dealing with different stages, from the manufacturer supply to the transportation to the distribution, to the last mile delivery, when eventually the vaccination. Just look at what happened recently. In October and November, Pfizer and others, because this is a new product, they predicted that they are going to have 100 million of doses at the end of December. Look what happened. Because of the new product, they overestimated what they have. They underestimated the time of overscaling the process. And now this is a bottleneck. Ontario got none this week, will get 26,000 next week instead of 80,000. From the supply chain perspective, we want to think about that this uncertainty can happen in every single stage of this problem. Of course, may not be at this magnitude, but it can happen. In transportation, we need to, as Anne said, we have this cold chain system to transport all of these products to different areas, to different locations. And then what would happen if anything failed in this system? And one thing that I really want to add here, we should not just think about now that we are in the short of supply. We want to keep this in mind, that all of these promises that we are going to have by the end of summer, all people vaccinated, means that we are going to have a lot of supply later on. And the nature of this problem is dynamic. Now we are in the short supply. We need to be careful of the planning, prioritization, but after some time that we are getting more and more and more supply, capacity might be the bottleneck, not the supply. Do we have a good strategy for delivering to the people? After transportation distribution, we are getting two types of vaccines now. Do we have a really good strategy how we are going to deliver to the people? Even not just now, later on, we know that people should be vaccinated using the same type. We need to track them. Is it really the good strategy to send everywhere two types, or do we want to divide the system? And again, not just for now. I want to emphasize that look at what happened in the States. They have doses in a store. They cannot vaccinate the people. And that's something that we need to keep in mind. And from the distribution, we need to keep it that the people should be tracked. We want to make sure that they have at the right time. and then last mile delivery. Nothing would happen if you do not have a good plan for the last mile delivery. For the last step, do we have enough locations? Do we have enough staff personnel that they can vaccinate the people? And do we have a good strategy for the scheduling and so on? To me, that's what we need to keep in mind and make sure that really we have a good plan for every single stage of this problem. That's my thought here.
Thank you, Hossein. And one question that is being asked over and over is whether it was possible, at least from strategic perspective, to bring manufacturing capacity, which is now a bottleneck, closer to when the vaccine is being deployed. Was this feasible at all through subcontracting or repurposing some manufacturing facilities and so on? What do you think about this?
Well, I think eventually they may have some plans here to use at least for some part of the material, because what is really, it seems that the main issue is the material, the raw material, and then the ingredients that they need for vaccine. And that's one of the issues. And then there is a chance that we can produce at least some of these parts, ingredients in some plants. It was in the news today that European pharmacy company agreed to help Pfizer, or at least to have some sort of coordination for the raw material production and help to make sure that they can make it faster and then scale up the process. And that can happen between other companies. If there is a capacity that we can produce at this time, there is no more important time than this time to coordinate each other to make sure that we can produce vaccine as much as possible and we can deliver to people.
Thanks, Hossein. And you have a couple of words to add, maybe?
Yeah, well, I would say, so I agree with everything that my colleague has just said. When it comes to the capacity question, we need to remember that for anywhere we're going to use from a vaccine vaccine manufacturing has to go through an extensively rigorous approval process. None of us wants the B grade vaccine, right? We want to ensure that the quality and the quality control is there. So that's really a question to bear in mind. I don't think you're going to be seeing, pop-up facilities that are being used for vaccine creation, because it's not going to meet that quality level, which is why it's taking so long. I know that Ford spoke a lot about this Kalamazoo Pfizer plant in the US. Well, as of October, they still hadn't received their approval to actually start manufacturing the vaccine at that location. I think by December, they actually had it. Now they're doing the substrate and everything else there, but not the actual vaccine itself. So it takes time, and we need that vaccine to work. And if it's not coming from a place that's gone through the controls, has the testing, it's sure that it's going to actually deliver as promised, that's part of the bottleneck in this manufacturing process. The other thing I wanted to make a quick comment on was the comment around the final mile. And I'm a full believer in everything Hossein just mentioned. The one piece that I would add to it is that not only do you need the staff and the ability to deliver, but you need the patients available to take that vaccine. And the Pfizer vaccine right now comes in a pack of about 1,000 doses, and it can only stay at room temp for a very limited amount of time. I think it's 2 hours without the saline and 6 hours with the saline. So if you're in a place with less of a population, you're not going to get through 975 doses. So how do you create the right type of hub model, the right type? And we have a colleague at Johns Hopkins who's suggesting, can we use some of our just-in-time supply chain mentalities and apply them to the actual distribution at that localized site for the vaccine, so that we don't risk wasting any, because we can't afford to waste any right now.
Thank you, Anne. The following question will be addressed to Jim, and it's kind of a twist from vaccine distribution, but more like how to prepare another supply chain to be able to handle the vaccine and its distribution. So Jim, my question is, back in November, DEMBI announced the capability to produce low temperature freezers capable of storing the vaccines, especially the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. Could you elaborate a little bit on this? And more importantly, what would have been the challenges with your own supply chain to be able to provide such product?
Sure. So we announced we can make minus 80-degree freezers, which is what the Pfizer vaccine needs. The Moderna and AstraZeneca don't need that cold. Making the products, we make freezers, so it's all you have to be is better on the insulation. It has 2 compressors. It's quite different technology, and the issue there then becomes service, because if you buy a normal home freezer, there's 50 people that can service it and whatnot. The other part of it is this cold chain. So a lot of it is the monitoring with the alarms, with the alerts. What we found is there's actually a much greater demand for minus 20 freezers, which is what your home freezer is, except it cannot be frost-free, because frost-free freezers fluctuate the temperature up and down, which does not work for a vaccine. And of course, they have to have this monitoring, because your freezer, power could be out for an hour today. You go home, your food's fine, you won't have any problem, but it's not true of vaccines. So with the alarms, the alerts, and stuff like that. So I am more of an advocate, especially since we have such a shortage of vaccines, focus on the minus 20 freezers for the short-term storage. You can keep Pfizer for 5 days in short-term freezer, minus 20. You can, but it won't keep for more than 5 days at that. But really the logistics issue is get it out and get it in people's arms. Don't get it out and store it. The minus 80 freezers, I believe, will be a much bigger thing post-pandemic when we're preparing for the next waves and the next pandemics, where we need to have a national stockpile of different types of vaccines. And these are the new RNA vaccines, which are different technology, which need this this minus 80, but at the same time, manufacturers are trying hard to make it so they don't need minus 80, because of course nobody likes it. The other factoid for people is dry ice is minus 78.5, which is effectively minus 80. So it actually can be stored on dry ice, and there's very good and very known technology. Dry ice is extremely safe. It's not safe if you touch it, but all it is a solid form carbon dioxide, which is in the atmosphere. So it's really quite benign and quite old and known technology. And you can store things, as long as you replenish the dry ice, you can actually store it without a freezer for a long time, but even in a shipping box, 2-3 days is no problem. And they even have boxes that'll last for 5 days.
Thanks, Jim. I don't know if Hossein or Anne want to comment on this, or we move on to the next set of questions.
No, I totally agree that, at this point, this is nothing more important really, as vaccines come to the system, keep it in the minus 20 temperature that we can, and trying to vaccinate the people as soon as possible. And then let's think about this minus 80 after the pandemic. We want to prepare the vaccine for later on.
Thank you, Hossein. So this first part, I tried to steer the discussion towards strategic supply chain network design, or strategic supply chains in general. The next set of questions will be devoted mostly to physical and digital supply chains as related to the vaccine distribution. So I start with the first question addressed to Anne. So we'll use the same order. And given your experience as a leader in analytics, digital transformation, and supply chain strategies, what are the challenges in vaccine supply chains from a technology perspective? And of course, ways to alleviate them.
So I think the simplest way to say is the tracking and tracing, right? Whether it's from the quality of that particular, you want to track where that particular vaccine came from the source all the way through to the distribution point, and ensuring that it is of quality, that it hasn't had these temperature issues that Jim mentioned, that it's still going to have its desired effect. At the same time, I mean, you heard Hossein mention there are multiple vaccines out there, and the protocols are calling for 2 vaccines at differing intervals, right? The Pfizer one, they're recommending 3 weeks. The Moderna one, they're recommending 4 weeks. And we want to make sure that those people are getting their second doses. We want to get to herd immunity as quickly as we can. So how do we make sure that we have the people that are coming back, we have the right people getting the right second vaccine at the right time interval? In Canada, we're a little bit luckier than some of the other countries for that ability to track people because of our healthcare system. We all have our health cards, and those can be used as a mechanism for tracking Canadians. In a lot of other countries, they don't have that same ability afforded to them for tracking their population as efficiently and as effectively. So that's the big area. That's where I would start. So the tracking and tracing technology to ensure quality as well as effective distribution from a patient perspective.
Excellent. And I believe the technology is available, so it's nothing new that has to be designed, right?
Yeah, there's a great Canadian, I would say they're beyond startup, but in Montreal or Quebec City named Optel. That is one of the things that they do is tracking and tracing, mostly for food products, but similar application.
Okay. Now, when it comes to, because this supply chain is typically a global supply chain, like would the tracking go beyond Canadian soil and could be done even from the manufacturing?
Oh yes, you need to track it. We all want to know what happens in the belly of that airplane as it crosses the ocean. I want to know if it took an extra hour, if the temperature rose. I want all those details before that plane lands.
Thank you. Jim, do you have any more comments on this subject?
No, I don't think so. It is about tracking and about alerts and about alarms. And the way I think of this is like shipping ice. If it melts, it's no longer ice, it doesn't serve it. So think of it like that. And we're talking something which is literally life and death. If my delivery on .com, my pen doesn't arrive, it's like, okay, that's no big deal. And if someone leaves it on the front porch and it sits, no big deal. This is a big, big deal because of the severe shortage, which is likely to be here for a long time. And part of the issue on the global is also governments start saying, like the US has mandated no vaccines leave the United States. And the European Union is talking about doing the same thing. That's why it would be great if we could make our own, but as someone said, it's not that easy, and I sure as heck don't want it made in the garage shop across the street that isn't certified and isn't going to make good product.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks. The next question is addressed to Hossein. Hossein, I know that you've done some work on inventory management, which is a major component of supply chain management. So given the requirements of the vaccine in terms of temperature, packaging, delivery, what inventory strategies have to be managed? Are there new types of problems that we have to deal with? Are there solutions available? And so on.
Yeah, good question, Samir. As both Jim and Anne mentioned, really the main challenge that we have is the storage capacity. We should really be careful that we cannot keep this inventory for a long time. It is a perishable product, what we call. And also we cannot even, when we open a package, we cannot keep it for more than a couple of hours. And therefore we should be very careful about the inventory management of this product. To manage that, the most important part is that to have a good schedule for patients that when they receive, we should make sure that using the tracking or any system that we have, we know that if we have an inventory today, they probably will be used tomorrow. That is the way of inventory management that we should keep in mind. And at the same time, we should make sure that since we need to vaccine people twice, they need 2 doses, we need to keep track of patients. We need to have a good schedule that when they get the first dose, we have them in the system for the second time, and we have the inventory for them for the second time. Now, what would be the best strategy? The best strategy would be that everything is very, very clean, static, deterministic. We know the flow of inventory coming to the system. We have a very good schedule for people that they are going to be vaccinated, and we have the capacity there. And then if they really would be able to register for the second time, then knowing the flow of the supply coming to the system, everything going to be perfect, as Anne says, going to like a just-in-time inventory system. Having said that, there might be some uncertainty. There might be some uncertainty in the supply. Even there might be some uncertainty in the show up. We should be careful that if you are going to schedule 100 people for tomorrow, there is a chance that a couple of them or more than that will know the show. And then if that's the case, we need to have a strategy that how we are going to use those doses schedule for them. As Anne said, when the package is open, we cannot keep them for a long time. Like in airline industry, they overbook the system to make sure that if someone doesn't show up, we have another demand, we have another customer. But something like that may be helpful, but what is really, really important here is because of the perishability of the product and the important that we do not want to lose a unit of vaccine, we want to make sure that we have a good storage capacity to keep the inventory. We have a good plan, a scheduling plan to schedule patients, and we should have a good plan for all different uncertainties that may come up, like no-show and so on.
Thank you, Hossein. Like over and over, like this idea that it seems planning is as important, if not more important than the logistics side. So it seems that everybody planned to the last minute so that everything runs smoothly. So my question is, are there platforms that would enable this? That means they have the optimization capability in terms of deployment, inventory, optimization, and so on that are available? Maybe Anne could help with this.
Well, I'll say not to do a commercial, but that's sort of what Connexus offers the marketplace, right? It's around figuring out your plan, understanding your supply, having transparency across your end-to-end supply chain, and then figuring out what is the best plan given the circumstance you're in. But guess what? That's, as we've come to know recently, disruptions are the new norm, and volatility is something we need to be aware of. So great, you have an optimized plan for the moment that you're in, but the reality is you need to have the agility to flex on the moment, whether that's to get extra patients so that they get jabs and arms in time, whether that's to realize all of a sudden your planned deliveries are going to evaporate. Let's look at this week in Ontario, in Canada, right? No availability. What are the scenarios? What are the what ifs you should be considering so that you can have the most effective and efficient rollout given the circumstances that you're in? And I'll tell you, if there's anybody on here from the Canadian government who'd like to reach out, I'm here to help. And maybe, Hossein, we take this offline, but I think there's opportunities for some of us who have these types of supply chain platforms to be able to help with the circumstances in Canada right now.
Yeah, I totally agree. There is what is really, really important in this supply chain. We should be careful and understand that we are dealing with a new sort of supply chain. Everything is here, and nothing is more important than having a robust supply chain, robust inventory management in the system, be flexible and agile, as Anne said, to respond to any changes that we may observe. And that's going to be the reality. If we do not take into account this one, and we do not have this what if, as you said, what if scenario or sensitivity analysis, we are going to get a lot of delay, and we cannot really meet the promises that we made by the end of summer. I totally agree.
Yeah, so Hossein, I'll pick on that point. The concept of resilient supply chains have existed for a long time. Are we talking here about resiliency in supply chains, or is it something more complex than that? Because personally, I have the feeling it's a little bit more complex than just resiliency or robustness in the supply chain. It's for, if you think about it, should be a pull, a push type of system? Should it be a system where stockouts, which are traditionally used to make up for volatility, be emphasized more? Like, is it my question, I guess, is it some sort of a supply chain strategy that we've seen before, or are we in new territory here?
I think the concept is the same, but the problem is much more different. The problem is much more complicated from different aspects. And then we want to react much faster than what we thought in the past in the supply chain. We want to be, as Anne said, when a package is open, we have a couple of hours or 5 hours. And if there is no show up, we want to be agile to call another person to bring it in. That constraint adding to the system, that makes the problem really much more challenging. And also this having the second dose at the right time. So far, the clinical study is saying that, we should make sure that we are giving 2 doses to people in a very limited time window. And if you want to keep that, to make sure the efficiency, what is really matter is that to have an agile, robust system for this specific problem, and to be very fast in and to be able to react in a, in a less than a day or so on. I think that's what really makes the problem much more challenging than we have seen before, considering that the product also is perishable as well. Yeah.
Thanks, Hossein. I'm gonna move into a slightly different topic here that has to do with last mile delivery of vaccines, and I'm gonna address this question to Jim. Jim, a major challenge in vaccine rollout is last mile transportation of vaccines. What are your thoughts on this, given that the main obstacle is refrigeration? And what lessons did the refrigeration industry learn that could benefit other cold chains in other sectors? Jim?
So I don't think it's as much refrigeration because it can be done with dry ice. But the key is you have to make the assumption that this last mile has some disruption, like a snowstorm, for instance, where you may end up having to store the product for longer than you had thought. The other issue is you have to still do the monitoring while you're going to make sure that the product was kept on spec, because nobody wants to take a product that wasn't kept on spec. So that can be expensive and is not in the usual last mile chains. But there is pretty good logistics because of .com and e-commerce in the Perlators, the UPSs, the FedExes of this world. They're very, very good at last mile.
Excellent, thank you, Jim. This is really the set of questions I prepared for the 2 rounds. Great insights, thank you very much. Next, we're going to be having the Q&A, but before doing that, I wanted to see if any of our panelists would like to make additional comments or have final thoughts on any of the subjects we brought up or any other subjects we missed.
The only thing I think I would add was, I guess it's the word transparency and trust. Everything we've spoken about thus far is very, I'll say mathematical or very engineering focused, which I guess is appropriate given who we are. We have so many human dynamics at play. We hear about localized governments that are holding half back, or we've heard that in some places they're trying to push through and consume everything so that they're just hoping that they have enough for the second doses when they come around. Or we've actually heard where we have almost a bullwhip effect of holdbacks. So the local government's held half back, but the next stage back is held half back, and the stage above them is held half back. So in fact, they're only actually administering a fraction of the doses that are available. Now, I will admit these are stories I'm hearing that are US-based stories, but this is the human mentality around, I need to protect my people. And there has never been a time when governments and industry need to work together with a sense of urgency. That's what's going to allow us to attack this problem holistically in a way to heal the earth faster. I don't know, Hossein, if you share my thoughts.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I just want to add that, more than ever, we really need to make sure that the pieces of this supply chain come together at the right time. We need to have a great coordination between different components. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult to meet these targets. I read somewhere a sentence that I really like is that analytics is the medicine for this complex supply chain. And really, what we really need now to make sure that we have a good AI, we have a good analytics, that we really can put all of this together. And at the same time, we can really work, industry and government can work together, and hopefully everything goes smoothly.
Hossein, if you don't mind, can you elaborate a little bit more of AI? Because now everyone is talking AI, and there should be a way in which we can leverage AI capabilities to help with this complex problem. Can you elaborate on this a little bit and maybe give a concrete example that we can benefit from?
Sure. As it started for the AI, we really, now that we have a short of supply, the very basic question is that to have a good demand prediction for different locations. Make sure that, okay, if we are going to prioritize the people, then we have a good number of, good prediction model for the demand at every location. At the same time, from the inventory management, we can apply AI to make sure that everything is transparent, is visible to ensure that you're not keeping inventory at one place and the other one is shorted. And this everything is coordinated. And also we need AI for the tracking the patient to make sure we can schedule them correctly to get them vaccinated in the 2 weeks time window or whatever the time windows are. For sure, AI is playing a big role. AI and is playing a big role in the supply chain problem that we are facing.
Thanks, Hossein. Jim, any final thoughts, comments, or points that we missed?
No, I think we've covered it pretty well. I look forward to the questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. So now it's time for Q&A. I need to open my Q&A. I see that there are a number of questions that were forwarded to me. We'll try to get to most of them, time permitting. So the first question is, should supply chain participants be liable for damages if the vaccine turns out to cause more harm than help? Anyone want to answer this question?
My opinion is no, because they're not in the job of doing that's not their role to do clinical trials. And you don't actually want to scare anybody away in the middle. You want people to, I mean, if Danby makes a -80 freezer that maintains -80, to say, oh, I'm going to get sued because someone takes a vaccine that's dangerous, you're making it so why would I make a -80 freezer? Don't do that. There's not enough money. And same thing with the poor. You give it to Perlator and Perlator does a good job, delivers it on time. It's just like making them liable because I cut myself with a knife I bought on Amazon. No, you can't, in my opinion.
Okay.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Another question was, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, no, I was saying I totally agree that we do not, at this point, we shouldn't scare people. We should make sure that we can really deliver the product as fast as possible and we can vaccinate people.
Okay, so I'm picking questions randomly from the Q&A. Another great question is, who is responsible for all coordinating or for coordination within these supply chain steps? Is each firm in the supply chain just acting on their own? So this is the classical issue of centralization versus decentralization. Who does it? Who pays the bill at the end of the day? Maybe Anne could help answer this question.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, it's probably no different than how the flu vaccine is distributed. There's different types of ownerships and different partnerships between different suppliers as well as different distribution companies. In some places, you'll see more governments are intervening and actually being the coordinating mechanisms. And in other places, it's still very localized to the companies and the participants in the process. This is, I mean, in a perfect world, we would see everybody come together and have a more centralized coordination mechanism, but we need to be realistic.
Thanks, Anne. Another question, can there be a mobile unit with a cold chamber delivering the vaccines to senior homes and living communities like apartments where there are mostly seniors? Maybe Jim could answer this logistics question.
Yeah, so the answer is absolutely. I mean, practically speaking, dry ice is the solution. You don't actually need a freezer, but any freezer, like a -80 freezer can be put on a truck. There's inverters, there's power. So this is known technology. And you don't have to freeze the whole truck. You just need to have a freezer in one tiny spot. But I would not even recommend that, despite the fact it's in my best interest to recommend it. I'd recommend use dry ice. It's known technology. It's everywhere. It's fairly economical, fairly inexpensive, and it can be replenished if there was a hiccup in the supply chain.
I think Pfizer's actually designed their box so that it can have dry ice fitted in it. And as long as I think they said the dry ice is replaced every 5 days, it'll keep it cold.
That's right.
Another question, it relates more to strategic supply chains and lessons learned. So the question says, in the wake of such unprecedented scenarios, a supply chain for the last, the least, the last, and the lowest is definitely and undoubtedly an essential one. But what a long-term solution to such pandemics? Even with COVID-19, we see new strains which are life-disrupting. Hossein?
Yeah, no, I think this is, we should learn the lesson and should be careful that, this pandemic may happen again, and we have a good solution, long-term solution for any disruption that we have in a supply chain, what happened at the beginning of the pandemic for the supply product. And then we really need to make sure that we have the research funding for this pharmaceutical industry or for others that they need to prevent themselves. And we have a plan that if something happens, how we are going to react to that.
And the only thing I'll add is I wonder if we should put a little bit of an emphasis on having a Canadian industry, just because governments can say, you can't ship from one country to another. Next thing you know, our population is disadvantaged if we have no technology or capability. And I'm not even in that business.
Precisely. Another question here, I'm going a little bit fast, so many great questions. One question that I see here is related to other parts of the world. So what are some of the unique challenges for distributing vaccines in developing countries, especially in the digital elements such as tracking, where countries may not have nearly as robust healthcare systems as we have in Canada or even in the US? Anyone want to comment on this? Personally, I feel that we have an obligation to help as well. The question is how.
I think companies, like Zipline are being used for remote distribution. That's a drone delivery system that's been used in Africa for other medications. And from what I understand, they're being deployed to help with the vaccine distribution there as well. I will say I'm not an expert, so I only know what I've read, and maybe somebody else is better equipped to comment on some of those details.
I mean, obviously the cold chain can be slightly more of a challenge when your electricity is not good, and when you're obviously in a hot country. In Canada, I mean, it can be cold enough out that it's not as difficult to keep things colder.
Now, the AstraZeneca vaccine, I don't think even requires sub-zero temperatures, if I remember correctly. So I think some of those are being targeted in other parts of the world.
That's correct. That's correct. But they still actually, I forget the temperature. I don't want to be quoted on, but it is not, they can't be at 25 degrees.
Right.
No,
still
I think it should
refrigeration
be
temperature.
Yes, refrigeration level.
Yeah. So related to this, one question says, if the Pfizer vaccine is a problem, it's problematic, at least in terms of temperature requirements, why are we not concentrating more on the Moderna vaccine?
Well, my understanding is that we're ordering as much where we can order it from, and whoever supplies it, we're happy to take it. So we'll take whatever we can get, is my understanding.
Yeah.
I believe a big delivery of Moderna is coming in the coming weeks. Now, the recent research has suggested that a booster will be required on top of those 2 doses to be able to protect against the South African strain with the Moderna vaccine. So that's a whole other level of complication as this thing starts to mutate around the world.
Thank you. Another question is, I want to know the opinion of panel members about new vaccines for new viruses. What will be the optimal plan for long term? It means, what should we have in place in case we have to go through a similar bad experience? I think we're talking about so many things. This is what strategic supply chain design is.
Yeah, I don't think any of us are virologists or have comments on the specifics of new vaccines. I think what we've understood is that supply chains traditionally, if you look over the last 10 years, have focused on efficiency. And now one of the things that's bubbled up, sort of optimized efficiency. And that's not going away, but we want to think about resiliency. And what does resiliency mean necessarily? It means that you have maybe a buffer stock or maybe you have the agility to pivot, that you've effectively dual sourced, that you're thinking about where your end customer is, that the peripherals, I used to be in the telco business, and we didn't worry about things like screws and connectors. We always had an overabundance of these items. So we need to think about healthcare a little bit in the same way, but recognizing what Hossein said earlier about expiry. That is, these are perishable items. Even the PPE, right? It's perishable after a finite amount of time. So how do we balance that efficiency so that we're not wasteful from a cost perspective, but at the same time are resilient and agile to be able to meet the circumstances that we're in? And I think you're going to hear that a lot more. And I'll tell you, what we're seeing with our customers is those chief supply chain officers are now in the hot seat with the CEO, figuring out what to do next and next time. And as a supply chain practitioner, I can tell you that has not always been the case. You've never heard the term supply chain mentioned so much as you have in the last year.
True,
I
true.
totally agree with you that, efficiency has been the focus of supply chain for a long time. But what we really learned during this pandemic is that that's not enough. We really need to make sure that we can react fast, we are agile, and we have other backup plans that we can deal with if there's any disruption in the system.
So the following question is related to technology, and it's addressed to Hossein. Is there a way we can include blockchain-related supply chain solutions in addition to AI?
For sure, I've seen a lot about talking about the blockchain, how we can use the blockchain to keep all this information and handle the information at different stages. And then we have a system that we can coordinate with each other to make sure that the information is available across the supply chain at the same time. The security is there if there is any issue with the risk. And I believe there is a potential there. Yeah, I agree with that.
A related question, this one is about data. What is the major challenge or any missing piece in the supply chain track and trace today for collecting data to be used for analytics to address supply chain problems? Is there a challenge, or is data available and it's good to use for AI purposes?
I think there are a lot of systems that they're collecting data, but of course, analyzing the data is a different story. If the question is that collecting the data, I think from the health system, as Anne said, we have a very good system, IS system, that we can collect information about the patients that they come and they are getting vaccinated. And also across the supply chain, I think at least in Canada and in the States, there are good systems that they can collect the data. But the question is that if you are really analyzing it fast, if you're getting really insight to implement it, that's the different question. That I'm not sure how far we are really into it, to use the data and doing the analytics to make sure that we can improve the system.
Yeah, I would add, first of all, AI is another tool in our toolbox, and there are no silver bullets when it comes to the analytics techniques. I agree with the comment that analytics can be the part of the solution here, but we recognize something like an AI model needs a whole lot of data to be able to test and train so that it's effective. There are other types of models that are not as data intensive. The thing to remember right now is that our immediate history, last year, the year before, are not necessarily good predictors of what's going to happen. Let's look at the number of people who take the flu vaccine. Those numbers are not reflective of the number of people who want the COVID vaccine. And so even a simple data point like that, the history, the behaviors, they're not reflective. So it's really important for us to think about all of the data. We talk a lot about demand sensing. It can almost be applied in this circumstance. What are those other types of outside in factors that are going to be relevant to making the right model? So do you have the right data? You always have lots of data. You can always take more because you don't know what the next thing is that's going to be the predictor of what's going to drive accuracy in your models. But if you're agile enough in response, it actually doesn't matter because you can quickly pivot. You want to be as correct as you can with the information you have, but you need to be able to pivot if it doesn't meet your requirements.
Thank you. And it's great because this ties up very well with the introduction. So we heard terms like resiliency in supply chains, efficient supply chains, responsive supply chains. Now this question looks at green supply chains. So the question is there environmental waste concerns in the supply chain, and how could the supply chain deal with it? Or are we just in such a state of panic that we didn't think about that angle?
So I believe
we're
in such a state of panic that I don't think that has that is not a concern in the general population or in any factor right now, I think.
Yeah, I might have a slightly different perspective. I don't know about the specifics, again, what Pfizer is thinking and what's happening in the specifics of the actual vaccine supply chain. But one of my team's responsibilities is kind of keeping an eye on big trends that are happening. And we've been talking about supply chain sustainability. And so I've been probing around and saying, well, what is it? What are we throwing them all out the window, or what's going on? Well, there's been a lot of learnings over the last year because we've seen parts of the world that who typically would have had a lot of pollution and whatnot, and we're seeing species come back. We're seeing revivals of near extinct animals that are now flourishing again. And companies who have put out 2025, 2030 carbon goals, they're not dismissing those. They may not be as fastidious to them as they always have been, but I think once we start to see things turn around, we're going to see an increased focus on sustainability so that they can meet the targets that have been set. I don't think it's going to the wayside.
I actually agree with that. I thought that we were asking in regards to the supply chain of vaccines. I think the priority is on the vaccine distribution, not on the being green. But I agree that this has woken the world up to say, hey, we can actually do this. This is meaningful. And I think that there's a economy pre-COVID and in COVID and post-COVID, and we're going to learn to do things differently. I think people are going to fly a lot less and do a lot more Zoom and do more work at home. And our habits have also changed around sanitation. There's going to be a lot more hand washing, a lot more social distancing, even post, in my opinion.
Yeah. So a lot of lean into the supply chain.
Yeah.
Okay. In the interest of time, we're running out of time. So I will conclude the Q&A right here. Of course, I would like to thank our panelists for the great insights and discussion today. Thank you, Anne, Jim, and Hossein. Greatly appreciated. I also want to thank Gosha, Prache, Carrie, and Erin from the Dean of Engineering Office for organizing the event. Finally, our thanks and appreciation to the audience, alumni, students, staff, faculty, and friends of the University of Waterloo for being with us today. We have a few more panels lined up. The next one is on February 25th, titled Reimagining Healthy Cities. You will receive an email invitation to register as well as a YouTube link for today's session. So please watch it and share it with your friends. This concludes the event. Thank you, everyone, and bye.